Hello, it's podcast number 1 from the Self-Publishing Formula.
Two writers, one just starting out, the other a bestseller. Join James Blatch and Mark Dawson and their amazing guests as they discuss how you can make a living telling stories. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
I'm delighted to tell you that our guest today is none other than the creative pen herself, Joanna Penn, who's a bit of an old mucker of yours, Mark, isn't she?
She is, yeah. As I told Joan when we spoke to her, it was great to have her on because she's one of the first podcasters I listened to when I started learning how to do this stuff 3 or 4 years ago, and she's got something like 250 or 300 episodes, which is that's something to aim for, James.
Yeah,
no pressure.
We're at the bottom of that mountain at the moment, but we are climbing assiduously. Now, one of the things I think we want to do in each podcast is have a glimpse into the working lives of us as authors, of how we're progressing and things we've learnt this week and so on. Obviously, we weren't broadcasting for most of this year, so I might do a bit of catching up for both of us. But Mark, I know you're taking a quite systematic approach to your work this year, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I've slightly in the past been guilty of I'm very productive, but I think I could be more productive. So one of the things I'm doing now is trying to introduce a bit more of a systemized system, so to speak, to try and get things moving a little bit more efficiently. So I'm kind of staring right now at a big year planner that I've stuck on the wall of my study. And one of the things I'm doing, and this is helping loads and loads at the moment, is at the end of every day just noting down the number of words that I've done. So if I start working on a new book on the first of the month and I figure I can do 3,000 or 4,000 words every day, it's quite easy to extrapolate forwards and see roughly when I think I should finish that book. And if I kind of put waymarkers or waypoints along each week, so on Friday I might say I need to hit 10,000 words, 20,000 for the next Friday, it enables me to make sure that I'm keeping in track with where I need to be, and hopefully motivate myself by kind of gamifying it a bit and demonstrating that I've actually got more words than I thought I would have at that time, and that's working really, really well. It's keeping me really focused. It's making sure I get my bum in the chair and do the words every day. And yeah, it looks like I'm going to be about 10 or 15,000 words ahead of schedule tomorrow, which makes me very happy. Yeah,
a good feeling. I mean, everyone finds their own ways of these little tricks of the trade to motivate yourself. I mean, some people just don't need it. They'll sit down and write and write and write. And I think Joanna takes a quite also a systematic approach. And I've emailed her in the past about doing some things, and she said, "Well, I'm writing in the morning." She always says that, so she blocks off every morning, I think, and does her writing. In fact, it's quite interesting talking to her from the psychological point of view of emerging from the rather dark thriller writer to the bubbly, bright and optimistic Joanna Penn in the afternoon. There's two sides to her, as will come out in the interview. I don't have a systematic approach. I'm probably like a lot of authors who are getting going and haven't really worked out how that's going to work for me. I think your approach is very good. Targets and knowing you're ahead of it or behind it, that's quite motivating. I'm interested to know what sort of state your house is in when you write, because I often end up writing tea time-ish for some, because I'm just have a lot of work on, a lot of things to do, and I prefer to get them all done. Then I can sort of feel I can write. And at 4 o'clock, actually, my house is quite busy. Children are emerging back from school. The door gets opened quite a lot. And because it's writing, perhaps in my mind, I don't take it as seriously as work as a lot of the other things I do. How do you approach that, Mark? Do you write in a quiet, empty house, or you take yourself off to a cafe, or what do you do?
Yeah, I do. I need a quiet house. So, I suppose the kind of the starting position is that is my work. So if I had to, I do lots of different things. So podcasting is a new thing I've added to the slate, but there's the course that we do. But if you had to make me pick one, it would be writing. So that is my work. So I tend to start working. I'm a morning person like Joanna. I'll start writing 8 or 8:30 most days. If the house is empty because my wife's gone to work and the kids are at nursery, then I'll write in the study, which is where I am now. Or if Lucy's here, or especially if the kids are here, then I'll go somewhere else. So I'll go into a cafe. I'm quite well known around cafes in Salisbury now. And I'll put some noise cancelling headphones on. I'll listen to some white noise. So something I'm listening to a lot at the moment is a new web service called brain.fm, which we might talk about later, which is very interesting, all about brain waves and productivity and that kind of stuff.
Really? What does it
And
do?
then I just sit down.
So does it play whale songs at you?
Kind of. Not whale songs. It is kind of musical, but it's very... it has beats. It's quite hypnotic. A lot of this is marketing BS, obviously, I suspect. But I think there is something in just the kind of non-lyrical music. It kind of puts you into a fugue state, if you like, where you're just very, very productive. And I tried it for a couple of days, and I've managed to add 25-30% to my word count. And
really?
it could be because it could be a placebo effect.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, who cares?
Yeah, it doesn't matter as long as it works. Yeah. I'm fascinated by this, though. I want to hear some of this. We need to perhaps look at a couple of these on a future podcast.
We will. I'm going to approach them and see if they'd like to come on and have a chat with us, because I think it's potentially really interesting for people who need that intense concentration, like writers do. So,
are you going to describe their approach as marketing BS when we have them on as a guest?
Hey, I don't pull any punches, James.
No, you don't. That's the lawyer in you. Look, one thing I wanted to mention quickly before we get into the interview with Joanna is just a bit of the state of the nation in terms of where we are with indie authors and the industry that we are in. And in February 2016, we had the latest report, the author earnings report, and it's the one that caught a lot of eyes, actually in the mainstream press as well, because it showed this really dramatic switch reversal of traditional publishing versus independent publishing, and Indy had overtaken. I'm knocking on 45% of all earnings now, and traditional publishing dipping below Indy for the first time ever. And that was such an important moment, wasn't it?
Massively important. And the thing is, author earnings has been going now for 2 years, I think. So, I'd like to get Hugh Howey and Data Guy on the podcast a bit later on, because I think Hugh is amazing, and Data Guy has got this fantastic grasp of the data. But what they're doing is just kind of casting light on something that indie authors have known to be true for a long time. We will talk about this ad nauseum, I should think, as we go forwards. But it would take an amazing deal now for me to consider selling the digital rights to any of my books to a traditional publisher, simply because, and I'm certainly not alone in this, I think I can sell them better than they can. And then when you start to add into things like 70% royalties as opposed to 15% max, then another 10% for your agent taken off. There are so many reasons now why the sensible authors are starting to make a preference towards self-publishing rather than getting someone else involved. And we've spoken about this before, and I think we mentioned it with Joanna. Vanity publishing these days is getting something on the bookshelves rather than having to what it used to be, which was having the arrogance, if you like, to think that you could go and print a book and sell it yourself without the kind of the seal of approval of a traditional publisher. It's just not like that these days. Things are changing so fast, and it's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this, because it's so exciting to be an author right now. Yeah,
one of the interviews we've got coming up, it's not Joe, I think it was Maria Force, who said that more has changed in the past 2 years than in the previous 20 in publishing. And that is an accelerating experience at the moment. And the good news is, do you know what? There's money to be made. There are livings to be made out of there. And just look at those lines on that author earnings report, and just make sure that you are determined to grab a piece of that action for yourself. Okay, let's get into this interview then. So Jo Penn, delighted that she is our very first guest. It won't be the last time she appears on this podcast, but we're always going to be very happy to have her on. So, Joanna Penn is a woman who probably doesn't need a lot of introduction to most of you, but I'm going to introduce her anyway because it's very impressive. A New York Times and USA Today best-selling thriller author under the pen name J.F. Penn, with over 500,000 books sold in 72 countries and 5 languages. She's one of the leading lights in the self-publishing movement. Her podcast and blog, The Creative Pen, has served as the starting point for many authors as they embark on a self-publishing career. She's got an amazing rapport with a large and engaged audience, very active audience, the Creative Pen followers, and she's seen as one of the most trusted voices available to authors today. So, Joanna, welcome to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be on the show, and thanks for the lovely introduction.
Well, it's all true, and I guess we've really just touched on what is a multifaceted life for you. Can you give us a snapshot of what Joanna Penn does during the day?
Well, I like to describe it as I have two heads. As you mentioned, I am a thriller writer, but JF Penn, I think of. This morning I was JF Penn and I was in the latest novel, and I basically don't talk to anyone. I'm plugged into rain and thunderstorms. JF Penn is very dark and stormy, basically. And then Joanna Penn, the creative Penn, is very much outwardly focused, trying to help people. I always wanted to be the British Tony Robbins, so I like to inspire people with what's possible. And I'm definitely a Pollyanna figure in self-publishing. I'm always sort of glass overly full. But I did spend 13 years as an IT consultant in my previous life, implementing accounts payable into large corporates, which I hope people will realize was a super boring job. So I left my day job in September 2011 to make a full-time living with my writing. But yeah, it's certainly been a journey.
I bet a psychologist would have good fun with the dark and stormy Joe Penn being locked away and then the bubbly one coming out later. There's something going on there, but let's just push that to one side for the moment. Now, Mark's with us, of course. Mark, I know when we've talked about Joe, we talk about somebody who's got a great barometer and an overview of the industry, and you were asking a lot about the changes that we've seen.
Yeah, I thought that would be an interesting thing to talk to Joanna about, because just as a kind of a supplementary introduction, when I started self-publishing 4 years ago, I suppose it was now, Joanna was one of the first podcasts I listened to, and I think I'll probably listen to every episode since. And it's a really fascinating and interesting podcast, and a really great way to get information on things that are happening, and also things that might happen. Joe's really forward thinking and has one eye on the future, which I find very interesting. So I mean, I've got loads and loads of value out of all of her interviews. I've been on the show once, and we've since become friends. Since it seems a bit weird since starting out all that time ago. Now that she's on our podcast, which is really cool. And I think it's going full circle.
So, Joe, why don't you give us an overview of the changes that you've seen since you began your blogging and your podcasting, when you're really getting under the skin of the industry? What are the major differences you've seen?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you, Mark. You're so sweet. And it is. Well, I think what's great about the indie industry is it's very generous and everyone's sharing everything. So, and I've learned, a lot from you guys as well. And that's one thing that hasn't changed. When I started self-publishing back in 2008, I was living in Australia. There was no international Kindle. At the time, the word ebook just wasn't really used for like a fiction novel. It was a sort of 200-page PDF that the internet marketing crowd was selling on a website, for $97 or whatever. That was the extent of sort of what ebooks were at that point. So 2008, I did what the old school self-publishers did back then, which was print thousands of books and try and sell them through live events, through bookstores, that type of thing. And so self-publishing at the time, I mean, I've always been very independent. So I actually looked at the publishing industry at that point and decided to self-publish because I couldn't stand how long everything would take. But I made so many mistakes because back then, this was before Twitter, or Twitter had literally just come out. Facebook was in its early days. So the Kindle then came out later that year, the international Kindle, which I was able to buy in Australia. I was one of the first people to buy the Kindle, and to see the potential of this future. It really was amazing. But back then, the stigma of self-publishing was still huge. It was massive. I mean, it was you only self-published if you were someone who couldn't get a publishing deal, or you were a professional speaker who sold books at the back of the room, which I actually was at the time. So that was fine. But then in terms of what's changed, I mean, actually, even when I moved back to Britain in 2011, I remember meeting some people in the publishing industry here and being treated, in a kind of a bad way, because the stigma of self-publishing in Britain has stayed a lot longer. I think, again, it's starting, it has changed here pretty much in the last couple of years. But we've definitely seen the opinion about self-publishing change. I mean, even this week, Mark's been in, Forbes magazine and all that. And we've seen this week Meredith Wild, who is a sort of a self-publishing success story, creating an imprint, being in the New York Times, the respect that is now given to successful self-published authors. is completely different. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that's changed. Of course, technology, there was no Kobo. There was no KDP Select. I think what people forget nowadays is how good we have it. Like, people moan, and fair enough, everybody has a bit of a moan, but seriously, back in 2008, you could not have made an income doing this. So yeah, a lot has changed since I first did this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, it has changed massively, and I don't really notice that stigma so much anymore. And I'm serving ads to thousands of people every day now and get lots of comments on those ads, as you'd expect. And I don't know whether it's just that people can't tell that the books are self-published, or they just don't care anymore. Because the number of times I really don't get many. I haven't had any comments that I can think of in the last couple of weeks where someone has said, is this a traditionally published book, or is it independently published? I think it's getting to the stage now where it's about the story and the actual the backstory behind how that book was published is not so relevant as it was. I mean, it was certainly 3 years ago. There was a lot of stigma, but I think that is going now, which is great.
Well, I don't know if readers have ever cared, who goes onto Amazon or goes into a bookstore and says, oh, I'd like the latest HarperCollins. I don't know if anyone's ever done that. Maybe Virago Press or, a few of these very literary, imprints, perhaps. But the vast majority of readers, I don't think have ever done that. So the author as brand name is one of those things that I think big name indies have realized, that if you can get your name into people's heads, then they will look for the next book. I mean, how many, you and I both like Lee Child. How many of his books, actual book titles, can people name? They can't. I probably I think Make Me is his recent one or whatever. But basically people know Lee Child and they know Jack Reacher. So these are the things, certainly for fiction, and then for non-fiction, it's about, are you being useful? If people type in, I need to diet. into Amazon, do they get back the things that answer their problem? So yeah, I think it's probably authors are so sensitive about publishers because we care, and most of the stigma and nasty comments you get are from people in the industry, other authors, agents, etc.
That's right. And I think if you look at, I think the phrase that I come back to quite often is vanity press, and that's not necessarily something that that readers apply to books. It's something that the industry kind of applied to people who couldn't get a traditional deal, and it's pejorative. It's kind of suggesting that you're publishing something because you want to puff up your ego and all that kind of stuff. But that is dying out now. I don't hear that very much anymore. And when I started writing again after I had my hiatus, that was something that I heard much more often. So that's great. If we can get rid of that, that's fantastic.
Yeah, sorry, James. I just want to come back on the vanity thing, because when people talk about vanity press now, I'm like, well, the biggest vanity press now is traditional publishing, because why else? It's really vanity and ego that makes us want HarperCollins or Penguin on the spine. And let me just say, there is nothing wrong with ego. We all have it. We have to in order to actually publish books. But so I think that the vanity idea very much now is, why do you want the things that you want? Do you want to make a living? Do you want to be in a bookstore? Do you want, why do you want those things? And that should be the reason that people choose a certain publishing path.
Yeah, it's really interesting how quickly that's happened as well. And a couple of years ago, I would see a colleague of mine who got a book deal and they were public, showing on Facebook their front cover, and I would think, well done you, fantastic. Now I look at them and I think, why have you done that? Why have you signed that contract?
That is true. I would say, though, that there is it's almost like a shift that is changing by country. So the US was certainly first. And I think I was very lucky that I was living in Australia in 2008. And I was influenced by the American and very strong Australian blogging movement, internet business movement in Australia at the time. People like ProBlogger, Darren Rouse, Yarrow Starak at Entrepreneur's Journey, and the Americans, because I lost my English. I went to Oxford University. My mum was an English literature teacher. I lost the care about that type of thing. I stopped caring because Australians don't care, Americans don't care. And now England has shifted. But what we're seeing next is Germany, which is a incredibly literary culture, Germany's starting to shift. We're seeing some other countries slowly. I was talking to a Nigerian author the other day. Nigeria is starting to shift, so this is the wave that I see that will sweep across the world. India, the first self-publishing podcast in India for Indians, mykitab.in has just started. This is the beginning in all of these other countries. So, and that's super exciting to me.
Yeah, so Joe, you paint a great picture at the moment, and I know that you and Mark are very focused on making hay while the sun shines and teaching others how to do that. Here's a question then from somebody who's yet to publish their first book, i.e. me. How long will this last?
Oh, I mean, that it's kind of crazy because I think this is only getting better all the time. So like I said, I've sold books in 72 countries. Some of those I've sold 2 books, I've sold 2 books in Nigeria, for example, but I'm now emailing with one of my readers in Nigeria and learning about how people are reading in Nigeria. It's fascinating. And Kenya and, some of these Asian countries, some of the South American countries. What I would say for anyone entering the market now is don't think it's all over. Like we've hardly even started. There was a podcast that Amazon India did, and they said this was January 2016. We are in minute 1, day 1 of e-commerce in India. There are 200 million educated English speakers in India who have money, who have smartphones, who work in IT. I think people's idea of what the rest of the world is, people get so obsessed with their local bookstore, but that's not the point. The point is that you and I, all of us listening, can sell books to this global market. And, as the streaming internet is rolled out, people shifting to reading on mobile, indies are so well positioned to sell in these markets because we can actually price specifically for those markets and still make a profit. So I see it as only the beginning of the most exciting time that authors have ever had. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a gold. I always say it when people ask. I think it's a golden age for writers at the moment, and readers too, because it's so easy to get stories out now, find new stories, new voices you wouldn't otherwise have heard. And you hit the nail on the head with the global thing. I mean, it's pretty exciting to look. China as well, big market, just waiting for books and to come along. It's a fantastic time to be doing this.
Yeah, and I think it's even more important than that. Like you said about new voices, talking to these Nigerian authors who basically said that, they tried getting a traditional, these are British Nigerians, and we're all in England and we know we have a multicultural society. So these are British Nigerians going, trying to get a publishing deal and being told that they already have an ethnic author on their books. And I was just like, oh, that is so offensive. And so some of these authors in India as well are starting to self-publish because their voices cannot be heard in the traditional sense. And I heard about Wattpad, the really good for YA books. They have a subgenre of romances featuring Muslim women in hijab, who just don't have stories told about the way that romance happens in those cultures. So this is what I'm excited about too. The publishers for so long have said, this is what you're allowed to read. This is what you're allowed to enjoy. And we only publish books that we think you should read, but the audience has shown that they love 50 Shades of Grey. They love all these different books, and that's why I'm excited. And also you can find your target market anywhere in the world. Again, people listening, the human condition is the same. It pretty much is. Everyone loves people and has a family and all that type of thing. And so stories cross these borders. I do think it's super exciting. And the tools that we're getting just get better every day.
Yeah, we hear quite a lot of negativity about the internet, and if you watch the news, it's often the dark side of it comes to the fore, but it can be an incredibly empowering and liberating force. Well, it is an empowering and liberating force in the world, and it's changing the way cultures interact and the way we live our lives, which is great. I
talk about social karma as well, which I think is something that's been massive for me. The energy you put out in the world is the energy you get back.
Very Beatles there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're reading terrible news and it doesn't change anything, and if you're trying to be generous and you're helping people and you're being positive, the internet is a wonderful place. Sure, I get a couple of nasty emails occasionally and tweets and whatever, but generally my internet, the place I live, is amazing. My readers are amazing, and you guys are amazing, and that's, I think, just because when I'm feeling negative, I don't share it. I try and keep the energy positive out there, and it doesn't mean it's all happy days, but we all still have to work hard. But I think trying to make the best of things is better than moaning all the time.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that completely. So just in terms of how things changed for you since when 7-8 years you've been publishing now, must be something like that?
Yeah, so 2008, pretty much 7 years. As I said, when I started, I wrote a non-fiction book first, and my intention really was to become a non-fiction author, professional speaker, which I did. But I also started a blog about the creative pen, about what I was learning along the way, because I fell for some of the biggest rip-off merchants around back then. In terms of, print thousands and thousands of books and have them all end up in the landfill, and, a number of other things like paid compilation books, a lot of the things that are still around today, and which is why I'm so passionate about, teaching this stuff, is I learn, or another thing, and you'll like this, I spent about 6 months learning how to do press releases. I made it, I got really good at press releases. I got onto national TV, I got in the national press, I got on national radio, and I ended up selling about 100 books. And that's when I started learning about internet marketing. So what's changed is, as I blogged, and this is something, if people want to write fiction and they don't feel they're creative, by blogging, I was able to kind of release my voice. I was able to get used to putting things out there in the world. And if I hadn't have had a blog and a podcast, I don't think I would have written my first novel, which is the thing that's really different. So now I pretty much, I make, of my book income, 60% is fiction, 40% is non-fiction. So, and I'm just writing the 12th novel. And I still have like 7 non-fiction books, but I'm very much, I want to write more and more fiction. And I think the non-fiction I won't do so much of that going forward. So that's kind of what's really changed. I guess also, excitingly, I was able to hire my husband out of his day job. Last year. So now we've got like a family business, and that's really exciting, because when I left my job in 2011, he was still doing the corporate grind. So, sorry, I dropped my pen. So it was
the creative pen.
It was great to be able to do that, and that's as a result of all of these things. And I do say to people when they ask about that, it's like, that's not with one book, that's with 17 books and a blog that's been running for 7 years, and a podcast, and all the income streams that I've been building up for years have made a mature business. And most businesses at 7 years should be making a decent income. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Same for me. When it took me quite a long time to get to a position where I was able to leave my job too. And you occasionally get authors asking how many books would it take for me to be able to do that, and it's unlikely to be 1 or 2 books. That's, some people manage that. I mean, people like Andy Weir, although he had been writing on his blog, he was reasonably quick out of the blocks. But other people look at people like Hugh Howey, and Hugh had like 10 books behind him before he wrote Wool, and that was the one that broke out. So I think it is really good advice, is to kind of just be prepared to be patient and write the next book. That's the best advice that I am able to give new authors when they ask what they should be doing once they've written the first book, is just keep writing.
Yeah, and you can't build a business based on a lightning strike. Andy Weir's a great example. You can't attempt to do an Andy Weir. I mean, you just can't. I mean, and also sometimes it's a zeitgeist. I mean, look at the Gone Girl was a zeitgeist. Wool hit. Hugh Howey is love the guy, but he didn't build a business like, say, Bella Andre or Barbara Freethy or Liliana Hart have grafted at building a business. One of those books took off massively and things happened. Now, when that happens, what's so brilliant if you have lots of books? So Hugh did, as you you say, if you have other books, you will sell a lot more. But if you only have that one book and you haven't even done something like put a sign up to your email list at the back, you know, you can get very upset. You know, you hit number one on Amazon and you only had one book. That spike is going to be pretty short-lived, basically. So, and also the other thing I say to people is, how valuable is anyone in the first year of a new job? Like whether you're a teacher, you know, whatever you are, a lawyer, you know, how valuable are you? I mean, you're just not. And in year 3, still not really. Year 5, you start becoming more valuable. And by year 10, you should be one of the top in your industry, but if you've stuck it out, because many, as you and I know, in the writing industry, most people don't even make it to one book, let alone make it to 10 years honing their craft and writing more and more books. So that's kind of what I think. I also love to learn from people like Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush, who've been 40 years in this business, and now, you know, are hybrid authors, obviously, but have been writing as a living for that long and have seen all the ups and downs. And, you know, I just read everything that they put out because I want to learn from people who have that kind of longevity.
Can I just take you back a fraction, Jay, talk about the non-fiction books? Because it is a fairly frequently asked question when I talk to other self-publishers, is somebody who writes non-fiction. They look enviously at people turning out thrillers and romance novels, and they ask the question, can I do this? Can you make money? Can you make a business out of it?
It is much easier to make a business with non-fiction. Fiction is super hard. I mean, you know, the thing is with non-fiction, most non-fiction authors have other products. So, you know, someone will put out a book and they will have a course off the back end about that is much more pricey, or they're a public speaker. So you're going to find that most of the best-selling business books, best-selling non-fiction books on Amazon, those people don't have many books. They will have a consulting business, a speaking business. You know, some of those guys getting 20 grand, 100 grand for speaking or running a consulting thing with a company. So I would say with nonfiction, most business models around nonfiction rest on having higher priced products around them. So if you want to make books from nonfiction alone, you have to follow the same model as someone like Steve Scott, S.J. Scott, who does, who made, I think he put it out there publicly that he made $500,000 last year with purely nonfiction. But Steve has 45 books. So if you actually do the sums on that, he's still making about the same as I am per book. He's just got a lot more. So that's the thing. And Steve focuses on, volume and co-writing and that type of thing. So yes, you can do, and that's the same model as most fiction authors are doing. It's volume and putting out a series and that type of thing. So with nonfiction, and then like I span both. And this, I would say to people, if you can avoid doing both, then do, because you do end up splitting your time and your personality into these two things. But yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with my nonfiction income. What's amazing is, say, every December, I make a massive stack of money on print books of nonfiction. Like, print sells in nonfiction so much more than fiction for indie authors. That's interesting. It's also has got me every single speaking gig I've ever had. I've never pitched for speaking. This year I'm speaking at the Digital Commerce Summit in Colorado, which is for Copy Blogger, which is like one of the goals of my life. I mean, it's so amazing. And that has purely come from the blog, the podcast, the non-fiction side of things. Absolutely, much easier to make money with non-fiction.
What would you choose if someone said to you, you can only do one? What would you go for?
I really couldn't choose, Mark, because I've been through this. Like, when I met you and I saw what you were doing before you did the course, how well you were doing with your fiction, and I knew, and you basically said, I just focused, and I'm like, if I could just focus, like if I cancelled my podcast, if I cancelled the Creative Pen, if I put all of this energy, if I stopped speaking, if I put all this energy into fiction, I would do so much better with my fiction. And that's got to be true, because you get what you focus on. By splitting my time, I split my focus. But I wrote a blog post about it. It's Plato's Chariot, which visually was, a Roman chariot or a Greek chariot with a black horse and a white horse, and the dark horse is that sort of darker side, and the white horse being the light, and you have to have the two of them running in parallel in order to be happy. And that's kind of how I feel. Like I need to teach people and help people, and I feel that fiction, when I write fiction, I almost feel it's selfish. You know what I mean? Like fiction is so what I want to do, whereas nonfiction to me is helping other people. And you're not writing nonfiction, but you're producing nonfiction content. So you're starting to split yourself. So, you've made this choice too, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was, it is, I think the kind of the motivation is similar. It's very nice to be able to show people things that work, that I've been able to develop to work very well. It is nice to be able to do that. And, honestly speaking, it's pretty good in terms of the income as well. I mean, it is something you can charge a little bit more for than a book, obviously. If I had to choose, I would certainly choose the fiction. I think it is a bit selfish. It's something that I love doing. I think I'd do it even if someone said to me there's no prospect of ever being able to publish a word again. I'd still write just for myself because I enjoy creating those worlds and creating characters and conversations and that kind of stuff. But we're very fortunate. It's something that can run in parallel.
From an outsider's point of view, let me just say that I think that both of your worlds, the reason that your non-fiction is valuable to people and works so well is because of your fiction, because you have that proven ability to do that. That then gives you something to talk about that's of value on the other side. So they do work in synergy. I know you both have this idealistic dream of being on the beach just knocking out novels, but from my point of view, please don't do that. Just keep putting out the non-fiction, because that's where the rest of us learn.
Oh, thank you. And I hate beaches.
Okay.
And I'm a workaholic. Actually,
and you lived in Australia.
Yes, I know. It's crazy. I lived in Brisbane, Australia, with some of the, Queensland beaches. But no, you spend a lot of time inside in Australia, or you just die from like skin cancer. But no, I would say the next non-fiction book I'm working on is going to be around the author mindset. And it's funny because I also do write my non-fiction books based on what I need to learn myself. So when I wrote the first edition of How to Market a Book, it was because I had just spent, 18 months, 2 years learning about what marketing was, because my degree is in theology and I have a second degree in psychology. So, I needed to learn marketing. So often the easiest way to learn something is to teach it. So that's kind of how I write my books now. And when I wrote Business for Authors, it was because I needed to structure my own business in such a way that it was running well. So I thought I would just write a book about it. So, I think that's a good, and I think a lot of people could do that, and nonfiction can be a palate cleanser in between novels, especially if you're finishing a series or finishing one book in a series, and you kind of want to do something a bit different.
Okay, before we lose you, Joanna, can we just drill down and get a little bit of detail from you? The world changes a little bit in the marketing, and you've been a trailblazer over the years. I wonder, what do you think is hot at the moment? What techniques are working? Where should we be focusing?
For nonfiction, because I presume there's nonfiction people listening, I still find content marketing to be amazing. So when people say, is blogging worth it? Blogging, podcasting, is still speaking, etc., putting out free information in exchange for people, either to come to your website or to click something and give them your email, is amazing. So the number one traffic source for me is Google SEO, which I don't pay for. And I don't mean I pay for SEO, it's Google organic search. So that's huge. So for nonfiction, for me, I continue to do everything I do, and the income just goes up all the time because I keep putting out content. And so it's free in terms of money, but it's not free in terms of time. So I would say right now, podcasting is just massive. You guys obviously believe that too, because you've started a podcast. And in terms of me as a consumer, I read barely any blogs now, and I listen to about 7 different podcasts as well as audiobooks. So I've noticed my own preference shift to audio, which I think is the same we're seeing the same shift in in books as well. I think audiobooks are only going to continue growing, which we've seen with Amazon announcing expansion in that area too. I just wanted to give a hat tip to content marketing for fiction as well, because of course Facebook ads are brilliant, but if people are just getting started and they want to give it a go, your own content is content marketing for fiction. So if you put a book out there for perma-free, which I have, my first in series, Stone of Fire, I still get downloads on that every day. I'm not in KDP Select. It's also really good on the other platforms, so iBooks and Kobo and Nook, which do have special promotions on first in series for perma-free. So, and if you have an email sign up there, you can get traffic, you can do email marketing, all based on having a perma-free book. So it doesn't cost you anything except time. So I would always say to people that, yes, if you have 3 books in a series, it's great to try a perma-free first in series. And then you can do paid traffic to that. You can do BookBub, you could do other things, but that will actually start people through your series. We need to keep learning from each other, and nobody has the premium on all the information. And I think this is a real importance around being an indie, is things change all the time, and you have to be learning from all different sources, and don't just dismiss what some people might say because it sounds crazy. Start paying attention. And I think that it's so important to pay attention to these different things. Like, I listen to the Sell More Book Show with Jim Cookwell and Brian Cohen, and I quite often get ideas from authors that you might never have heard of, who've tried something new, or it's so brilliant to keep learning and finding out about this stuff. So thanks for trying that, Mark, and I'm glad it was good for you.
It's good so far.
Good. Joe, Mark wrote a load of questions, most of which we haven't got to because the conversation has flown all the way through, as I knew it would. But there was one question I thought would be really useful for a lot of people to hear your answer to, which is, what single piece of advice would you give yourself if you could go back and talk to yourself as you were starting out?
I think it's going to depend what type of person you are. We mentioned ego earlier. And I want the subtitle of this author mindset book to be Massive Ego and Chronic Self-Doubt. Because that chronic self-doubt, I think, is so much more. I think we still all have it. I think whatever writers say, like, they still feel that every time, but we become more used to how that feels. And I think at the beginning, like, it took me years to write a novel. I probably wanted to write a novel when I was about 5 years old, and I didn't write one until I was sort of 35. I still care very much what people think, and that holds me back sometimes. It holds me back from doing crazier stuff. It was my 5th novel, Desecration, where I finally stopped self-censoring my writing. So, I would, if I telling myself kind of back then, it would be, stop caring so much what people think. Write this scene or write this book, and don't worry about how it's going to be perceived in the world. That is very difficult. In fact, the book I'm writing right now, Destroyer of Worlds, there is a scene in it I'm actually quite worried about in terms of some religious extremists. But then, in terms of marketing, possibly if you get banned, it's a good idea. But this kind of self-doubt and that's too much, that stops you from writing, can be kind of crippling. So that's the advice I would give myself, is really, look, just don't self-censor, get that first draft down, and edit it later, but stop caring so much what people think.
Great. Well, that sounds like a really good note to conclude on. I've no doubt that we will talk again in the future, Joe, because you're a good friend of the self-publishing formula. Mark, is there anything that we've missed that, from your astute mind, that we need to talk to Joe about before we finally let her go?
I think we should certainly ask Joe to tell listeners where they can find both of the horses that are pulling a chariot.
Yeah, so you can find Joanna Penn at thecreativepenn.com, and you'll find the Author 2.0 blueprint there, which is a free ebook and video series and everything on how to do everything. And then JF Penn at jfpenn.com, F for Francis, and my books are everywhere in all formats, and I'm on Twitter at thecreativepenn.
a delight talking to Joanna. She's one of the brightest voices in the industry, totally engaging. By the way, she's also a professional standard broadcaster, putting us to shame. I think she's so engaging and brilliant to talk to, but an important influencer, and has influenced you, has influenced quite a lot of the people who will be following and listening to our podcast. And so somebody who we always want to tap into and hear her view of what's changing and what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. She's always inspirational, and her podcast is one of the first ones I listen to as soon as it comes up on Mondays. I'll always be listening to it.
Indeed. Okay, that is about it for podcast number 1. Thank you to our guest, Joanna Penn. You can email us. We'd love to hear from you, your suggestions for guests or questions to us. We are on support@selfpublishingformula.com. You can follow us on Twitter @selfpubform, and of course you'll find us on Facebook and elsewhere. Our next guest is Pat Flynn, and if you know who he is, you'll be excited about hearing him on the podcast. If you don't know who he is, you should do, because he's somebody who dominates the space in which we operate. That's digital marketing, online marketing. Whether you're an author or whether you have ambitions for the non-factual side as well, it's a great interview, and he's an amazing individual to listen to. And that episode is ready for download now. And don't forget, you can win a great prize by helping spread the word about this podcast. Visit selfpublishingformula.com/contest to enter. The prize on offer is Mark Dawson's acclaimed paid premium course, Facebook Advertising for Authors. A course which isn't available to anyone at the moment, by the way. It also includes Twitter advertising for authors, with further modules to come, including YouTube ads for authors. And you can give yourself more than one chance to win. Just pop along to our dedicated page at selfpublishingformula.com/contest.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Visit us at selfpublishingformula.com for more information, show notes, and links on today's topics. You can also sign up for our free video series on using Facebook ads to grow your mailing list. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.